They said the Duke of Harrogate had no heart. They said the war in the peninsula had carved it out of his chest and left a stone in its place. But on a freezing Tuesday, in November 1814, Julius St. Clair found something on his doorstep that would shatter his icy fortress. A basket, a child, and a note that carried a secret capable of burning London to the ground. She has your eyes. I have your heart. 7 words, 1 lie, and a truth that would kill to stay buried. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the scandal that nearly destroyed a dynasty. The rain in London did not wash things clean. It merely made the grime slicker. Julius St. Clair. The 6th Duke of Harrogate stood by the window of his study watching the deluge batter the iron railings of Grosvenor Square. At 32, Julius possessed the kind of dangerous, brooding handsomeness that mothers warned their daughters about, and daughters whispered about behind fans. He was tall, his frame lean, and hardened by years of cavalry service, but his face, sharp-jawed and aristocratic, was marred by a cynicism that sat heavier than any scar. The clock on the mantel, a gaudy, gilded thing his late father had purchased in Paris, chimed midnight. "Your Grace." Julius didn't turn. He knew the tread of his butler Silas Vane. Vane had been with the family since Julius was in leading strings. "Go to bed, Vane. The brandy will keep me company." "It is not the brandy, Your Grace," Vane said, his voice trembling slightly. A rare occurrence. Vane was a man who could polish silver during an earthquake. "There is something at the door." Julius turned, then his dark brows knitting together. "At this hour, if it's Lord Stirling collecting on a wager, tell him I'll pistol him at dawn." "No, sir. It is... You had best come see." Julius set his glass down. The firelight caught the amber liquid, casting blood-red shadows on the Persian rug. He strode past the butler, his boots echoing on the marble of the grand foyer. The heavy oak doors were already unbarred, standing slightly ajar. The wind howled through the crack, bringing the smell of wet soot and horse manure. Vane pulled the door wide. On the porphyry step, sheltered poorly by the overhang of the portico, sat a wicker laundry basket. It was wet, and from within the bundle of grey wool blankets came a sound that stopped Julius's breath in his throat. A whimper, soft, terrified, and utterly helpless. Julius stared. He had seen men die. He had seen horses torn apart by cannon fire. He had walked through the aftermath of Badajoz. But this small, vibrating bundle terrified him more than any French bayonet. "Bring it inside," Julius ordered, his voice harsh. "I have already sent for Mrs. Gable," Vane said, scooping the basket up with surprising tenderness. They retreated to the library, the warmest room in the house. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, arrived in her nightcap, looking like a ruffled hen. She gasped when Vane placed the basket on the low table. With trembling fingers, Julius pulled back the damp blanket. The baby was perhaps 6 months old, pale skin flushed with cold, a tuft of black hair. She stopped crying the moment the blanket was lifted, blinking up at the looming figures with wide, curious eyes. Julius felt the floor tilt. The eyes were not brown like the mother he suspected. They were not blue like the common rabble. They were grey, a startling crystalline grey with a rim of darker charcoal. They were his eyes, the St. Clair eyes. "God in heaven," Mrs. Gable whispered, pressing a hand to her mouth. "She's the spit of you, Your Grace. When you were a babe." Julius ignored her. His gaze had fallen on a piece of thick cream-colored parchment tucked into the folds of the child's swaddling clothes. It was pinned with a cheap brass brooch, a contrast to the expensive paper. He reached out his leather glove, creaking, and unpinned the note. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. Ink blots stained the corners as if the writer had been weeping or running. She has your eyes. I have your heart. No signature, no name. Just those two damning sentences. Julius crushed the paper in his fist. The room suddenly felt very small, very hot. I have your heart. There was only one woman who could claim that. Only one woman who had held his heart in her hands and then vanished into the fog of London 8 months ago without a word of goodbye. Laura. Laura Fairfax, the daughter of a disgraced vicar. The woman he had intended to marry. Damn the consequences. Damn the title, damn the king himself. Vain, Julius said. His voice was no longer harsh. It was dead. Send a footman to Bow Street. Tonight. Sir. I want to know who left this basket. I want the streets scoured. And Vane. Yes, your grace. Prepare the nursery, the one in the east wing. Mrs. Gable looked up, eyes wide. The east wing. But that hasn't been opened since your brother. Open it, Julius snarled, turning back to the window, the crushed note burning a hole in his palm. Because if those eyes tell the truth, I have a daughter. And if that note tells the truth, the woman I love is in grave danger. The arrival of the child whom Mrs. Gable tentatively named Claire, after Julius's mother turned Harrogate House into a beehive of whispered scandals. By noon the next day, the servants were trading theories over rough tea. Was she a bastard? A foundling? A niece? Julius did not sleep. He sat in his study, the note smoothed out on his desk, a glass of whiskey untouched beside it. He closed his eyes and let the memory take him. London Spring, 1813. He had met Laura Fairfax in the most unducal of places, a dusty bookshop on Charing Cross Road. He was looking for a treatise on agricultural reform. She was reaching for a volume of Byron. Their hands had brushed. A cliché, yes. But when she turned to apologize, the air had left his lungs. She wasn't a classic beauty. She was too sharp, her chin too pointed, her mouth too wide. But she had a vitality that made the debutantes at Almack's look like wax dolls. Byron, he had scoffed, trying to regain his composure. A bit melodramatic, isn't he? Life is melodramatic, my lord, she had replied, recognizing him instantly despite his lack of entourage. It is only fitting our poetry matches it. They had argued for 20 minutes. He walked her home. She lived in a cramped boarding house in Bloomsbury, far from the fashionable haunts of Mayfair. Her father had died leaving debts. She worked as a governess for a merchant's family. It should have ended there. A duke and a governess. But he went back, again and again. For 3 months they lived in a stolen world. Walks in Hyde Park at dawn before the ton awoke. Notes hidden in hollow trees. It was reckless. It was intoxicating. For the first time since the war, since the shrapnel at Salamanca, had nearly taken his leg, and the darkness had taken his soul, Julius felt. Light. He remembered the last night he saw her. The rain had been falling then, too. He had brought her a ring. Not the Harrogate diamond, heavy and cursed, but a simple band of gold with a sapphire. He asked her to marry him in the small parlor of her boarding house. Laura had cried. She kissed him with a desperation that he now realized tasted of goodbye. "I cannot be a duchess, Julius," she had whispered against his neck. "Your world, it has teeth. It will eat us." "Let them try," he had sworn. "I will protect you." "You can protect me from swords, my love," she said, pulling back her hazel eyes, searching his. "But you cannot protect me from whispers, or from your family." He had left her that night, promising to return in the morning with a special license. When he arrived at dawn, her room was empty. Her landlady said she had packed a bag and left in a hackney carriage. No note, no forwarding address. Just gone. He had torn London apart, looking for her. He hired runners. He bribed dock workers. Nothing. It was as if Laura Fairfax had never existed. Present day. Julius opened his eyes. The child Claire was upstairs. She had his eyes. If Laura had been pregnant when she left, the timeline fit. 8 months ago. But why leave the child now? Why on his doorstep? And the note, "I have your heart." It implied possession. It implied she was still alive. "Your Grace." Julius snapped his head up. A man stood in the doorway, dripping wet. It was Henry Bowden, the runner Julius had hired months ago and rehired last night. Bowden was a rat-faced man, but the best tracker in the city. "You have news?" Julius stood his chair, scraping loudly. "I found the hackney driver," Bowden said, wiping his nose with a dirty sleeve. "The one who dropped the basket. And he picked up a fare near the docks. Whopping. Said it was a woman-hooded cloak. She paid him double to drive to Grosvenor Square, leave the basket and drive off. She didn't get out." "Whopping," Julius muttered. "The slums. Why would Laura be in Wapping? Did he see her face?" "No, sir, but he heard her." "Heard her? She was weeping, Your Grace. And he said a man was waiting for her back at the drop-off point. A big man. With a cane." Julius's blood ran cold. "Did he describe the cane?" "Aye. Said it had a silver head, shaped like a serpent." Julius fell back into his chair, as if struck. He knew that cane. He had seen it pointing across the floor of the House of Lords. He had seen it tapping impatiently at the tables of White's Club. It belonged to Lord Archibald Stirling. Stirling, Julius's cousin. The man who was next in line for the dukedom of Harrogate should Julius die without an heir. The puzzle pieces slammed together with a sickening crunch. Stirling. If Julius married a commoner, Stirling would have mocked him. But if Julius had a child, a legitimate heir, Stirling would lose his claim forever. But Claire was illegitimate. Unless Laura and he were married. No, they weren't. Or unless Stirling was using the child as leverage. "Bowden," Julius said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Get my pistols." "Sir, you can't just ride to Lord Stirling's house. He's a peer of the realm." "He's a dead man," Julius said, standing up and buttoning his coat. "He has the woman I love, and I am going to burn his house down around his ears to get her back." "Wait, Your Grace," Vane interrupted, stepping into the room with a silver tray. On it lay a fresh letter. "This just arrived, by courier." Julius snatched the letter. The seal was not wax. It was a simple sticker, but the paper smelled of lavender. Laura's scent. He tore it open. "Julius, do not come for me. If you approach Stirling, he will kill me. He knows about Claire. He knows she is yours. Keep her safe. She is the only proof that we—" The writing trailed off as if the pen had been snatched away. Julius stared at the paper. The only proof that we, what loved were together, or proof that they were married. A memory flashed. A hand fasting they had done in jest at a country fair months before she vanished. A simple ribbon binding their hands, a drunk parson mumbling words. They had laughed about it. But if that parson had been real, and if Sterling had found out, then Claire wasn't a bastard. She was the rightful heir to one of the largest fortunes in England, and Laura wasn't just a mistress, she was the Duchess of Harrogate. And Archibald Sterling had kidnapped her to ensure the secret never came out. Julius looked at Vane. The fire in his eyes had returned hotter than before. "Change of plans, Vane. Put the pistols away." "Sir." "If I kill him, I never find her. We have to play this game," Julius said, crushing the second note next to the first. "But we are going to play by my rules." He walked to the window, looking out at the grey London sky. "Vane, send an invitation to Lord Sterling. Invite him to dinner tomorrow night." "Dinner, sir. Is that wise?" "Oh, it won't be a pleasant dinner." Julius smiled a wolfish, terrifying grin. "Tell him I wish to discuss the matter of my heir. Tell him I've found a child." The dining room at Harrogate House was designed to intimidate. The walls were hung with tapestries depicting the slaughter of the Trojan War, and the table was a slab of mahogany long enough to seat 30 men. Tonight it sat only 2. Julius sat at the head, his face a mask of bored aristocracy. Opposite him sat his cousin, Lord Archibald Sterling. Sterling was a large man, running to fat, with a complexion that spoke of too much port and too little fresh air. But his eyes were sharp, beady, and black like a shark's. He ate his roasted pheasant with a fastidious precision that made Julius's skin crawl. "Excellent bird, Julius," Sterling said, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. "I must say I was surprised by the invitation. You've been reclusive of late, brooding over your agricultural reports, I hear." "A man must tend to his estates, Archie," Julius said, swirling the crimson wine in his glass. "Or the weeds take over." Sterling chuckled a wet, rasping sound. "Indeed. Weeds are a nuisance. They must be pulled out by the root before they choke the healthy plants." The double meaning hung in the air, heavy as the scent of beeswax candles. "Speaking of new growth," Julius said, softly, leaning forward, "I have had a visitor, a rather small one." Sterling stopped chewing. He placed his knife and fork down slowly. "Oh, do tell. A child, left on my doorstep. A foundling, I suppose." Julius watched his cousin's face closely. "A girl. How quaint," Sterling said, his voice level, though a vein ticked in his temple. "And what will you do with it?" "Send it to the workhouse, surely. Or perhaps an orphanage. St. Jude's has room, I hear." Julius felt a jolt. St. Jude's? Why mention that specific orphanage? "I was thinking of keeping her," Julius lied smoothly. "She has a look of the family. The eyes, specifically." Sterling picked up his wine glass. His hand did not shake, but his knuckles were white. "Bastards are messy, Julius. They complicate the line of succession. They create confusion. If I were you, I would dispose of the problem. For the sake of the title." "The title?" Julius mused. "That's all that matters to you, isn't it? Archie, being the 7th Duke." "It is our duty to protect the lineage." Sterling snapped his mask, slipping for a fraction of a second. "You have no wife, no heir. You spend your days mourning a ghost. Someone has to think of the future. And if I told you I know who the mother is..." Julius dropped the bait. Sterling froze. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. "Then I would say," Sterling whispered, leaning in, "that you should be very careful with that knowledge. Women who abandon their children are often unstable. They disappear. They meet with accidents. It would be a tragedy if your attachment to a whore led you into dark waters." He knew. He knew Laura was the mother. He knew Julius loved her. And he was confirming in his serpentine way that he held the power to make her meet with an accident. Julius smiled. It was a terrifying expression devoid of humor. "You are right, cousin. The world is a dangerous place. One must always watch one's back, even in one's own dining room." Sterling stood up abruptly. He reached for his cane, the silver serpent's head glinting in the candlelight. "I have tired of this game, Julius. I have business to attend to. Enjoy your playing house with the brat. But remember, foundlings are fragile. They catch fevers. They stop breathing." Sterling donned his silk top hat. "Good night, cousin." As Sterling limped out of the room, the heavy doors closing behind him. With a thud, Julius exhaled a breath he felt he had been holding for an hour. "Vane!" he barked. The butler materialized from the shadows. "Did Bowden follow him?" "Yes, your grace. He is on the back of the carriage as we speak." "Good." Julius stood up, his hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of not strangling his cousin across the table. "Archie mentioned St. Jude's. It's a clue, Vane. He's arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable, so he drops hints to mock me." "St. Jude's is in Whitechapel, sir," Vane said, his face grim. "It is a hell-hole." "Then that is where we go," Julius said, stripping off his velvet dinner jacket. "Fetch my old uniform coat, the grey one, and a pistol. Tonight the Duke of Harrogate stays home. Captain St. Clair is going hunting." The fog in Whitechapel was different from the fog in Mayfair. In Mayfair, it was melancholic. Here it tasted of coal dust, rot, and gin. Julius moved through the shadows, a nondescript figure in a heavy wool coat and a low-slung cap. He was no longer the lord of the manor. He was a soldier moving behind enemy lines. Beside him walked Henry Bowden, the runner who moved with the silent grace of a street cat. "St. Jude's is ahead, sir," Bowden whispered, gesturing to a grim brick building that loomed out of the mist like a tombstone. "Used to be an orphanage. Closed down 2 years ago after the typhus took half the children. Now, it's a warehouse for the East India Company. Or so the paperwork says." "And who owns the paperwork?" Julius asked, his hand tightening on the pistol in his pocket. "A shell company," Bowden replied. "Registered to a solicitor who works exclusively for Lord Sterling." They circled the building. The windows were boarded up, but light leaked through the cracks of a cellar door. 2 men stood guard bruisers with broken noses and cudgels. "Distraction," Bowden suggested. "No time," Julius said. "Laura might be in there." Julius stepped out of the shadows. He didn't sneak. He walked directly toward the guards with the imperious stride of an officer. "You there," Julius barked, affecting a rough, commanding tone. "Move aside. Lord Sterling sent me." The guards blinked, confused by the confidence. "We didn't hear nothing about a visit." "That's because he doesn't trust you with the schedule, you lout," Julius snarled, closing the distance. "Now open the door before I report you for incompetence." For a second, the guard wavered. That second was all Julius needed. He lashed out the butt of his pistol, cracking against the man's temple. The guard dropped without a sound. The second guard lunged, raising his cudgel. Bowden was there, instantly tripping the man and driving a knee into his chest. Clean, Bowden grunted. They dragged the bodies into the alley and broke the lock on the cellar door. The smell hit them first, damp straw and stale fear. Julius descended the stone steps, his heart hammering against his ribs. Please be alive. Please. The cellar was a maze of crates. In the center, a small area had been cleared. There was a cot, a bucket, and a table with a single candle burning low. "Laura!" Julius called out, rushing forward. The cot was empty. He touched the blankets. They were still warm. "She was here," Julius said, his voice cracking. "She was just here." He scanned the room frantically. On the table there was a plate with half-eaten bread and a small leather-bound book. A Bible. Julius picked it up. It was a cheap edition, the kind found in pews. He flipped it open. On the flyleaf, scratched in charcoal, was a desperate message. He wants the paper. He knows about the parson. Find Bloom. Little Mulverton. "Bloom," Julius whispered. "Little Mulverton." "Sir," Bowden called from the corner of the room. "Look at this." Julius turned. Bowden was holding up a piece of fabric, found snagged on a nail near the back exit. It was a ribbon, blue silk. Julius took it. He recognized it instantly. Laura had worn this ribbon in her hair the day they went to the country fair, the day of the hand-fasting. "They moved her," Julius said, his eyes hard as flint. "Sterling must have realized I would figure out the location. He's one step ahead." "Little Mulverton is a village in Sussex, sir," Bowden said. "Why there?" "The fair," Julius realized. "That's where we met the parson, the man who married us. Sterling is trying to find him. He wants to destroy the evidence of the marriage before he kills Laura. If he destroys the proof, the child is a bastard," Bowden reasoned. "And Sterling remains the heir." "We have to get to Sussex," Julius said, shoving the Bible into his coat. "If Sterling gets to the parson first, Laura is as good as dead." "Sir," Bowden warned, looking at the candle. "This wax, it's barely melted. They didn't just leave. They are still moving." As if on cue, the sound of carriage wheels clattering over cobblestones echoed from the street above. Julius bolted up the stairs, bursting out into the night. He saw the rear of a black carriage disappearing into the fog. He raised his pistol, aiming at the driver, but lowered it. A stray shot could hit Laura. He stood in the rain, the blue ribbon clenched in his fist. "Saddle the horses, Bowden," Julius ordered. "We ride for Sussex tonight." "It's 4 hours hard riding in the dark, Your Grace." "Then we ride hard," Julius said, turning back to the house. "I lost her once to my own cowardice. I will not lose her again to that snake." The village of Little Mulverton was asleep when Julius and Bowden arrived, their horses lathered and blowing hard in the chill dawn air. It was a picturesque hamlet, the kind that poets wrote about, but to Julius it looked like a battlefield waiting to happen. They found the rectory next to a crumbling stone church. The garden was overgrown with briars. Julius didn't bother knocking. He pounded on the door. After a long minute, a window scraped open above. An older man, with a shock of white hair and a nightshirt, leaned out. He held a blunderbuss. "Clear off!" the man shouted. "I've nothing worth stealing unless you want a sermon on damnation." "Reverend Bloom," Julius shouted up. "It's Julius St. Clair. The man from the fair, with Laura." The blunderbuss wavered. "St. Clair, the soldier. Open the door, Thomas. My wife's life depends on it." A moment later, the bolts were drawn back. Reverend Thomas Bloom ushered them into a dusty kitchen. He looked older than Julius remembered, more lines around his eyes. his hands shaking with a palsy that wasn't just age. "I heard you were a duke now." Bloom grunted, pouring ale into dirty mugs. "Didn't think you'd remember a hedge priest like me." "You weren't a hedge priest, Thomas," Julius said, leaning across the table. "You were ordained. You told me." "Was," Bloom corrected. "Defrocked 20 years ago for gambling. But the ordination holds. In the eyes of God and English law, a marriage performed by me is binding, as long as there are witnesses and a record." "The record?" Julius said urgently. "Where is the register? The book you wrote our names in?" Bloom looked away, his eyes shifting to the fireplace. "Thomas," Julius warned, "tell me you have it." "A man came here yesterday," Bloom whispered. "Big man, fancy clothes, had a cane with a snake on it." Julius's blood turned to ice. "Sterling. He offered me £500 for the page with your names on it," Bloom said. £500, your grace. That's more than I've seen in a lifetime." Julius stood up, overturning his chair. "You gave it to him." I took the money," Bloom stammered, shrinking back. Julius lunged, grabbing the old man by the collar of his nightshirt. "You sold my wife to the executioner. Without that paper, she is nothing. My child is a bastard." Wait, Bloom wheezed, holding up his hands. "I took the money, but I didn't give him the page." Julius froze. "Explain." "I'm a gambler, my lord. I know a bluff when I see one. That man, he had murder in his eyes. If I gave him the page, he'd have killed me to tie up the loose end. So I gave him a forgery." Julius released him. Bloom stumbled back, rubbing his neck. "A forgery. I copied the entry onto a spare sheet of parchment. Forged the signatures. Gave him that. He burned it right here in my hearth, laughed like a demon, and left." "So the real register..." Bloom walked to a loose floorboard near the pantry. He pried it up with a knife and pulled out a leather-bound volume wrapped in oilcloth. "It's here," Bloom said, patting the book. "St. Clair and Fairfax, April 14th, 1813. Legal and binding." Julius closed his eyes, relief washing over him so intensely he almost collapsed. He was married. Claire was legitimate. Laura was the Duchess of Harrogate. But the relief was short-lived. "Sterling thinks he destroyed the proof," Bowden said, speaking for the first time, "which means he thinks he's safe to dispose of the woman." "Exactly." Julius said, his eyes snapping open. "He thinks he has won. He will take Laura somewhere secluded to finish it." "He mentioned something," Bloom piped up. "While he was burning the paper, he muttered about the Cliff House, said the view would be fitting for a tragedy." Cliff House. Julius racked his brain. Sterling didn't own a cliff house, but Sterling's mother had been a d'Amboise. The d'Amboise family had a ruined estate on the coast, Blackwood Manor, overlooking the cliffs of Dover. "It's 2 hours south," Julius said. "Bowden, can your horse make it?" "If he can't, I'll run," Bowden said grimly. Julius turned to Bloom. "Guard that book with your life, Thomas. If I don't return, take it to the king himself." "Go, boy," Bloom said, clutching the book to his chest. "Save your duchess." Julius ran to the door but stopped. He turned back to the old priest. "You were wrong, Thomas." "About what?" "You're not a gambler. You're the best man I know." Julius vaulted onto his horse. The sun was fully up now, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. Somewhere to the south, on the edge of a cliff, the woman he loved was waiting for a rescue that might already be too late. He kicked the horse into a gallop. Blackwood Manor sat on a jagged tooth of rock jutting out over the English Channel, a decaying monument to a family line that had gone mad generations ago. The roof had collapsed in the west wing, and the windows stared out at the churning grey sea like empty eye sockets. Julius and Bowden left their exhausted horses half a mile back. They approached on foot, using the overgrown hedging for cover. The wind here was ferocious, carrying the salt spray that stung Julius's eyes. "2 guards at the front," Bowden whispered, peering through a spyglass. "And the carriage is round the back." "Take the guards," Julius ordered, his voice swallowed by the gale. "Quietly. I'm going inside." Bowden nodded and vanished into the high grass. Julius moved toward the rotunda, climbing a trellis that groaned under his weight. He slipped through a broken window on the 2nd floor. The house smelled of damp rot and old wood smoke. Julius drew his pistol. He moved silently down the hallway, listening. He heard voices drifting up from the grand ballroom below, a cavernous space open to the elements on one side where the wall had crumbled away to reveal the sheer drop to the rocks below. He reached the balcony overlooking the ballroom and looked down. His heart slammed against his ribs. Laura was there. She was tied to a high-backed chair near the precipice. Her hair was wild, her dress torn at the hem, but her head was high. She looked defiant. Sterling paced in front of her, his silver-headed cane tapping a frantic rhythm on the stone floor. "You are being stubborn, my dear," Sterling shouted over the roar of the ocean. "Just tell me where the copy is. I know Bloom gave you a copy of the marriage lines." "There is no copy," Laura spat back. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "And even if there were, I would burn it before I let you touch it." "Then you leave me no choice." Sterling sighed, feigning regret. He stopped pacing and looked out at the drop. A tragic accident. A distraught mother overcome with shame throws herself into the sea. It's a clean story. The scandal sheets will love it. "Julius will know," Laura said. "He knows everything." "Julius is a fool," Sterling screamed, his composure shattering. "He is playing daddy to a bastard in London while I secure the future of this family. He doesn't have the stomach for what needs to be done. He never did." Julius stepped out from the shadows of the balcony, his pistol raised. "You mistake mercy for weakness, Archie." Sterling spun around, his eyes wide. Laura gasped, twisting in her chair. "Julius, get away from her." Julius commanded, his voice, cold and steady, cutting through the wind. He descended the grand staircase, never lowering the gun. Sterling laughed, a jagged, nervous sound. He moved quickly, placing the tip of his cane under Laura's chin. With his other hand, he drew a small pocket pistol and pressed it to her temple. "Drop it, Julius, or I paint the walls with her." Julius froze at the bottom of the stairs. He was 20 feet away. Too far to rush him. "You've lost Archie," Julius said, placing his pistol slowly on the floor and kicking it away. He raised his empty hands. "Bowden has your men outside. The runners are on their way." "It doesn't matter," Sterling yelled, his face purple with rage. "I destroyed the register. Bloom gave it to me. Without that paper, she is nothing. The child is a bastard. You have no heir." "Is that what Bloom told you?" Julius took a step forward. "The old man is a better gambler than you gave him credit for. You burned a forgery, Archie." Sterling blinked. The cane trembled against Laura's throat. "Liar." "The real register is safe," Julius pressed, taking another step. "I saw it an hour ago. St. Clair and Fairfax. April 14th, 1813. It's done. She is the Duchess. Claire is the heir. And you are nothing but a kidnapper and a thief." The color drained from Sterling's face. The realization hit him like a physical blow. If the marriage was proven, his motive for killing Laura vanished, or rather killing her, would gain him nothing but a hangman's noose. He had already lost the title. "No," Sterling whispered. "No, I will not let you have it. If I cannot be Duke, then you will have nothing to be Duke of." His eyes shifted to the edge of the cliff. He grabbed the back of Laura's chair and hauled it backward towards the crumbling edge. "No!" Julius roared. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He launched himself across the room. Sterling fired. The shot rang out, deafening in the stone room. Julius felt a sear of fire graze his shoulder, but momentum carried him forward. He tackled Sterling, slamming into the heavier man's chest. They crashed to the floor. The chair with Laura still tied to it teetered dangerously on the uneven stones, inches from the drop. Julius drove his fist into Sterling's face, shattering the man's nose. But Sterling was heavy and desperate. He clawed at Julius's eyes, screaming like a banshee. He grasped for his cane, finding the heavy silver head, and swung it. It connected with the side of Julius's head. The world spun. Julius collapsed sideways, dazed. Sterling scrambled up, gasping for air. He looked at Julius, then at the pistol lying a few feet away. He lunged for it. "Julius!" Laura screamed. Julius shook the darkness from his vision. He saw Sterling's hand close around the gun. He saw Sterling turn, raising the barrel. But Sterling had forgotten the floor. The ancient stones near the edge were slick with sea spray and moss. As Sterling planted his weight on his bad leg, to turn his boot slipped on the wet stone. His eyes went wide. His arms cartwheeled, trying to find balance that wasn't there. There was no scream, just a sudden, terrified silence as gravity claimed him. Lord Archibald Sterling tipped backward over the edge of the broken wall and vanished into the grey mist below. A second later, the sound of the surf swallowed the impact. Julius lay on the floor, chest heaving, blood trickling from his temple. He pushed himself up, crawling on hands and knees to the chair. "Laura," he choked out. He fumbled with the ropes, his fingers slippery with blood. The moment the last knot came loose, she threw herself into his arms. They held each other on the floor of the ruined manor, the wind howling around them, weeping with the force of a grief that had finally ended. "You found me," she sobbed into his coat. "You found me." "I will always find you," Julius whispered, burying his face in her neck. "I have your heart. Remember." The journey back from the precipice of ruin was not taken in a carriage, but in the slow, quiet hours of the night. For the first week following the death of Lord Archibald Sterling, the world seemed to hold its breath. The authorities came and went. The coroner, a man who knew better than to ask too many questions of a duke, recorded the death as misadventure, a tragic fall during a tour of the family's coastal estate. The scandal sheets whispered, of course. They claimed Sterling had gone mad, or that he had been drunk, or that he had been fleeing a spectre. But they did not know the truth. The truth was locked in a leather-bound book in the breast pocket of Julius St. Clair. Julius did not return to London immediately. He took Laura and the child to a small private estate in Kent, a place of soft hills and apple orchards, far from the grime of the city and the salt spray of the cliffs. He needed to heal the blow to his head, had left him with headaches that blinded him for hours. But more importantly, they needed to learn how to be a family. It was a Tuesday a month after the rescue, when the reality of their new life finally settled. Julius was sitting in the garden, a blanket over his legs, watching the bees drone over the lavender. He heard the rustle of silk and turned. Laura was walking across the grass. She wore a simple muslin dress, pale blue, her hair loose. She looked younger than she had in the cellar, but the shadows under her eyes were still fading. She carried Claire on her hip. "She's teething," Laura said, sinking onto the bench beside him. "She has chewed through 3 handkerchiefs." Julius reached out, offering a finger. Claire grabbed it instantly, her grip surprisingly strong, and gnawed on his knuckle with gum-filled ferocity. "A fighter," Julius murmured, wincing slightly. "Like her mother." Laura didn't smile. She looked at him, her hazel eyes searching his face. "Are you in pain? Only when I think too hard." "Then stop thinking," she said, softly. "The lawyers are handling the estate. Sterling's debts are being settled. You have nothing to do but sit here." "I'm not thinking about the estate," Julius said. He withdrew his hand from Claire's grip and took Laura's instead. "I'm thinking about next week." Laura stiffened. The piece of the garden seemed to fracture. Next week was the return. The season was beginning in London. The invitations had been sent. The Duke of Harrogate was expected to present his wife, the wife no one knew he had, and his heir. "I cannot do it, Julius," she whispered, looking down at the grass. "I was a governess. I lived in a boarding house. They will eat me alive. The Jersey coterie, the patronesses at Almack's. They will look at my hands and see ink stains. They will look at my dress and see the seamstress I used to be." "Let them look," Julius said fiercely. "Let them look until they go blind. It is not that simple. You know how the ton works. If they reject me, they reject Claire. She will be an outcast. A wealthy outcast? Yes, but lonely." Julius shifted, wincing as his healing ribs protested. He turned his body to face her fully. "Laura, look at me." She raised her eyes. "Do you remember the night I asked you to marry me, in that terrible parlor with the smell of boiled cabbage?" A faint smile touched her lips. "I remember. I told you then that I didn't care about their rules. I lied." Laura pulled back slightly. "You lied." "I lied because I didn't understand the rules myself," Julius admitted. "I thought the rules were about bloodlines and breeding. They aren't. The rule of London society is fear. They are afraid of anything that is real. They cloak themselves in gossip and powder because underneath they are empty." He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. "You are real, Laura. You survived poverty. You survived loss. You survived Sterling. You have more nobility in your little finger than the entire House of Lords combined. When you walk into that ballroom, you won't be asking for their approval. You will be granting them an audience." Laura looked at him, the tears welling in her eyes. She looked down at Claire, who was now happily shredding a daisy. "An audience," she repeated, testing the weight of the word. "Besides," Julius grinned, the old dangerous spark returning to his eyes, "I have a secret weapon." "Oh, and what is that?" "You'll see." The preparations for the Harrogate ball were military in their precision. Silas Vane, the butler, was in his element. He moved through the London townhouse like a general barking orders at footmen and polishing the silver until it gleamed like weaponry. Mrs. Gable took charge of the nursery, shielding Claire from the chaos, while a small army of seamstresses descended upon the master suite. Julius had forbidden the popular modistes. He did not want Laura dressed in the current fashion of high-waisted, simple pastel gowns that made women look like Grecian columns. He wanted something else. He wanted armor. He commissioned a dressmaker from Paris, a woman who had fled the revolution and knew the power of drama. On the night of the ball, the air in Grosvenor Square was thick with anticipation. The line of carriages stretched down the block. The horses stamped on the cobblestones, their breath pluming in the chill evening air. Inside the ballroom was a galaxy of candlelight. The crystal chandeliers cleaned specifically for this night held 1,000 tapers. The heat was rising, carrying the scent of hothouse roses and expensive perfume. The murmurs were deafening. "Is it true?" Lady Jersey whispered behind her fan to Lord Alvanley. "A secret marriage, a child. I heard she was an actress," Alvanley drawled, taking a pinch of snuff. "Or a French spy. Sterling died trying to expose her, you know." "That's the rumor." "Nonsense," scoffed the Dowager Countess of Leven. "I heard she is a country mouse, a vicar's daughter. St. Clair probably married her while drunk and hid her away in shame." The speculation swirled a poisonous fog. At the top of the grand staircase, the orchestra fell silent. The heavy double doors of the private apartments opened. A hush descended, starting from the foot of the stairs and rippling out to the edges of the room like a wave. The herald struck his staff against the floor 3 times. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "His Grace the Duke of Harrogate, and Her Grace the Duchess of Harrogate." Julius stepped out first. He looked magnificent in formal evening wear, the black velvet absorbing the light, the star of the garter pinned to his chest. But he did not look at the crowd. He turned back, extending his hand. Laura took it. She stepped into the light, and the collective breath of London society hitched. She was not wearing pastels. She was wearing silver. The gown was a masterpiece of heavy silk, embroidered with thousands of tiny seed pearls that caught the candlelight and threw it back. It was cut low daringly, so displaying the creamy expanse of her throat. And there, resting against her skin, was the Harrogate diamond. It was a stone of legend, a deep, flawless blue, surrounded by diamonds as large as hazelnuts. It hadn't been worn since Julius's grandmother died. It was heavy, ancient, and undeniably regal. But it was her face that silenced them. Laura Fairfax did not look like a mouse. She did not look like a governess. Her dark hair was swept up in an intricate coiffure woven with silver ribbons. Her chin was high, her expression serene, bordering on bored. She looked down at the staring faces with the cool detachment of a queen, surveying her subjects. "My God," someone whispered. Julius tucked her hand into the crook of his arm. He could feel the slight tremor in her fingers, but to the room she was granite. "Ready," he murmured, barely moving his lips. "Granting an audience?" she whispered back. They began the descent. Every step was a statement. Click, click, click. The sound of their shoes on the marble was the only noise in the room. As they reached the floor, the crowd parted instantly, creating a wide avenue. No one dared to block their path. The bowing and curtsying began a ripple of silk and velvet dipping low. Julius led her to the center of the room. He signaled the conductor. The orchestra began a waltz, a scandalous dance still considered fast and intimate by the older generation. He swept her into his arms. "They are staring." Laura breathed, her hand tightening on his shoulder as they spun. "Let them," Julius said, his eyes locked on hers. "They are trying to find the floor. They want to see the ink stains." "Do they see them?" "No." Julius smiled. "They see the diamond, and they see the way I look at you. That is enough to terrify them." They danced. For 3 minutes, they were the only 2 people in the world. The gossip, the scandal, the fear, it all dissolved into the rhythm of the music. When the music stopped, the applause was polite, tentative. They were still unsure. Was she accepted, Or was she merely a curiosity? Then came the moment Julius had planned. The doors to the side salon opened. Mrs. Gable walked in. She was not dressed in her housekeeper's black, but in a fine grey silk, acting as nurse for the evening. In her arms was the bundle of lace. Julius held up a hand. The room went dead silent again. "My friends," Julius said. His voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the gallery. It was the voice of a man who had commanded cavalry charges. "You have met my wife. Now I ask you to meet the future of this house." He took the child from Mrs. Gable. Claire had been asleep, but the transition woke her. She fussed for a moment, her small face scrunching up. The crowd leaned in. Is it a monster? Is it a commoner's brat? Julius turned Claire to face the room. "Lady Claire St. Clair," he announced. At that moment, perhaps disturbed by the sudden light or the sea of faces, Claire opened her eyes. She did not cry. She simply stared. She looked directly at the Dowager Countess of Leven, the fiercest gossip in London, who stood in the front row. The Countess gasped. She raised her quizzing glass, leaning forward. The baby's eyes were wide, catching the light of the chandeliers. They were a startling, piercing grey, a ring of charcoal around the iris, a crystalline brightness in the centre. They were Julius's eyes. They were the eyes of the first Duke whose portrait hung in the gallery. They were the eyes of a lineage that went back 300 years. The Dowager Countess lowered her glass. A slow smile spread across her withered face. "Well," the Countess said, her voice cutting through the silence, "there is no denying that stamp. She is a St. Clair through and through." The Countess curtsied, a deep, reverent curtsy to the infant. It was the signal. The dam broke. "The eyes," whispered a viscount. "Look at the eyes. She is the image of him. Charming child. A true heiress." The tension in the room snapped, replaced by a rush of sycophantic cooing. The ladies surged forward to admire the baby. The men clapped Julius on the back. The acceptance was total, absolute. Laura stood by Julius's side, watching the tide turn. She felt a hand slip into hers. Julius squeezed her fingers. "The secret weapon," he whispered. "Genetics." Laura laughed. It was a genuine bubbling sound that made the nearest gentleman smile. "You are terrible." "I am effective," he countered. The ball lasted until dawn. It was nearly 5 in the morning when the last carriage rattled away. The servants were extinguishing the candles, the smoke drifting in lazy ribbons toward the painted ceiling. Julius found Laura in the library. She had taken off the heavy diamond necklace and laid it on the desk. She was standing by the window looking out at the grey light of the morning. The rain had returned, a gentle London drizzle that blurred the world outside. He walked over to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back into him, exhausted but victorious. "You were perfect," he said into her hair. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Did you see Lord Alvanley?" He looked at me as if I were a prize mare at Tattersall's. "Alvanley is an idiot, but he knows quality when he sees it." Laura turned in his arms. Her face was pale, stripped of the armor of the ballroom. "It's over, isn't it? The hiding, the running. It's over. And Sterling. Forgotten," Julius said firmly. "He will be a footnote in the family history, a cautionary tale about gravity and greed." Laura sighed a long, shuddering exhale. She reached into the pocket of her dress. "I have something," she said. She pulled out a scrap of paper. It was battered, stained with water and age. The edges were soft like felt. "She has your eyes. I have your heart." Julius froze. "I thought you lost that." "I found it," she said, "in your waistcoat pocket the night we came back from the cliffs. You kept it next to your heart. It was the only thing I had left of you." Julius said, his voice rough. "For months I would read it every night. I hated it, and I loved it." Laura looked at the paper. It was a cruel note. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how else to tell you, to make you look at her and see yourself not just a burden." "It wasn't cruel," Julius corrected her. "It was the truth. You had my heart. You took it with you when you left that boarding house. I was just a walking corpse until you came back." He took the paper from her hand. "We don't need it anymore," he said. He walked to the fireplace. The embers of the night's fire were still glowing, pulsing with a dull orange heat. He held the paper over the grate. "Wait," Laura said. He stopped. "The words are true," she said, walking over to him. She placed her hand over his, guiding it. "But the note belongs to the past, to the rain, to the fear." Together they dropped the paper. It fluttered down, landing on a glowing coal. For a second, nothing happened. Then the edges curled. The cream paper turned brown, then black. A small flame licked up blue and yellow, consuming the ink. "She has your eyes. Gone. I have your heart. Gone." The ash crumbled into the grate, indistinguishable from the wood and the coal. Julius turned to his wife. The dawn light was stronger now, illuminating the library. It caught the grey of his eyes and the hazel of hers. "I love you, Laura St. Clair," he said. "And I love you, Julius," she whispered. He kissed her. It was slow, deep, and filled with the quiet certainty of a storm that has finally passed. Upstairs in the nursery, Lady Claire St. Clair slept soundly, her chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Her grey eyes closed to the world she would one day rule. But for now the house was silent. The ghosts were gone, and the Duke of Harrogate was finally, truly home. And so the scandal that threatened to tear the House of Harrogate apart became its greatest strength. Julius and Laura's love story proves that sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with swords on a battlefield, but with truth in the face of ruin. Sterling's greed was his undoing, but it was a single brave act of a mother, leaving her child in the rain, that saved them all. What do you think? Was Laura right to leave Claire on the doorstep? Or was it too dangerous a gamble? And would you have forgiven Julius for not finding her sooner? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this tale of betrayal, romance, and redemption, please hit that like button. It helps the channel immensely. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another story from the archives of history's greatest secrets.